Hey, welcome to BenUp, where this Indigenous Catholic navigates through life's messy waters. In this first episode of BenUp, I want to give you all a little bit of an idea of what to expect in the future. Let's first start with the words BenUp. Everybody's heard of the phrase man up? Well, BenUp. And BenUp simply means to engage in life's spiritual battles and to make a Catholic difference in the world today. Ben comes from St. Benedict, who I named this car after, and that's why there's so many St. Benedict medals around. So these videos will be centered around something I call the battle between the two Trinities. There's the good Trinity and there's the bad Trinity. I chose the good Trinity. The good Trinity is the Trinity I use to navigate through life's messy waters. Now, like all Trinities, there's three elements. Let's first talk about the good Trinity, and then we'll talk about the bad. But the first Trinity, and my Trinity, and the first element of that is my indigenous roots. Now, when I say the word indigenous, I know some of y'all might want to just tune out right now, but before you do, hold on a second, and let me give you a little trigger warning here. If you're that kind of person who would rather see Columbus Day replaced by Indigenous Peoples Day, or you're that kind of person who likes hearing what's going on with the Catholic Church's Amazon Synod, you might not like what I'm going to say from this point on, because I'm not a fan. Okay? With that said, I'm what some of us call FBI, and FBI is short for not Federal Bureau of Investigation. Oh no. FBI is short for full-blooded Igorot. Yes, my mom and my dad are both Igorots. Now, some of y'all don't even know what an Igorot is, so let me just give you a little crash course here. Igorots are the indigenous ethnic tribes in the Cordillera Mountains in the Philippines. Now, you know, like in Scotland, they got the Highlanders, you know, like Sir William Wallace. You just see that movie, Braveheart. Love that movie. So you got the Highlanders and you got the Lowlanders. Well, in the Philippines, and in Luzon, the Highlanders are the Igorots and the Lowlanders are the rest of the Filipinos. Let me point out something to you about us Igorots. For the 300 plus years that Spain had ruled the Philippines, they had in that span of time when they were colonizing the Filipinos, they were never successful in colonizing my ancestors. They were never successful in colonizing the Igorots. Us Igorots have been able to maintain everything about our ethnic identity, which is our language, our culture, our religious practice, etc. We did, however, at the turn of the 20th century, adapt many Western things, but that was of our own volition. But the point is, we were never colonized by Spain. It wasn't until shortly after my parents died in '95 in a car accident, Gotham Potsie, may they rest in peace, that I started taking interest in my cultural background, my heritage, my ethnic heritage. I returned home twice. The visit back home really sparked an interest in my heritage. From there, I started to try to learn more about our indigenous practices, trying to learn the language I came here speaking, which was Kankanai, trying to relearn that because I forgot all of it. I was eating more and more of our foods. I thought I was getting connected. I became the president of the local Igorot Association here in Illinois. Led our group in the Chicago Thanksgiving Day Parade. I thought I was being connected, and it wasn't until I started writing about my heritage. When I started writing the novel that I wrote, Igorot, that I started realizing how weak my connection really was. I was trying to connect with all the exterior things that seemingly make up a culture, but what I was missing were the things I was seeing in my daily life growing up through my mom and my dad, which is the virtues and the values of our people. A key beautiful thing about my ancestry is our people always had the natural law engraved in our hearts. It was like the DNA, part of our DNA. Like the primary precept of the natural law, to do good and avoid evil, was always there. Even the secondary precept prohibits things such as theft and adultery were there. When I was growing up, there was this word that I periodically heard either from my parents or from the older other people, and it was a word called Inayan. Basically, Inayan is a principle that includes virtues and traits of courage, fortitude, truthfulness, humility, kindness, fidelity, honesty, and things like that. That was always there. And that to me, I saw every day growing up. In my writing of my novel, Igorot, I decided to change that novel into making a real big emphasis on our virtues, the values and the virtues of my ancestry. Without the natural law, oh my goodness, we are in trouble. To these days, we're just going further and further from the natural law. At least my ancestors. I mean, you didn't need a priest, or you didn't need somebody to tell them that shacking up with somebody else's wife or husband was a bad thing. You didn't need to tell them that stealing someone else's chickens and whatnot is a bad thing. Those things were already part of our culture. You didn't have to tell them there's only two genders, a man and a woman. Sometimes I think if my ancestors were around today, boy, their heads would be spinning around. Like, what in the world's going on? So that's very important to me, is my indigenous roots there. Now let's talk about the second part of that good Trinity, which is me being an American, America. I thank God every day that my parents chose to come to this country. I thank God that they made the sacrifices they did to come here, and then to continue making sacrifices to raise us here. I'm thankful that I was able to assimilate here to America. Now, when I say assimilate, a lot of people these days, I hear some people saying assimilation's not good. Don't assimilate. You don't want to assimilate. There's this talk about not wanting to assimilate. Now, that all comes down to, what does it mean to be an American? Because just like being an Igorot, one can look like an Igorot, speak like an Igorot, eat like an Igorot, dress like an Igorot, but if they've lost connection to their values, then they're not really much of an Igorot. If they're doing bad things, if they're if they're living an immoral life, they're not really good Igorots. Now, same thing with America. There's so many different shapes, colors. We're just such a big melting pot here. It's hard to say what makes an American American. Well, simple. Just like my indigenous roots, the values being important there. Same thing here with being American. Now, you could take a quarter here, and you will find the values on that quarter there. There's this guy named Dennis Prager. He wrote a great book, and I recommend this. It's called Dennis Prager, Still the Greatest Hope: Why the World Needs American Values to Triumph. American values. Get this. On this quarter, the three values are there, the three values that make up what he calls the American Trinity. There you go again. Trinity within a Trinity. How about that? But on that quarter, you'll find, everybody knows, in God we trust, which is very important. Also in that quarter, you'll see liberty. But also on there, the third thing is those Latin words. Latin words. E pluribus unum. From many, one. Oh man, that's all you need, is those three things that we need in this country right now. Now let's talk about the third element in my Trinity. I have the indigenous Igorot roots, my Americanism, But those two are not enough, though. They're not enough to get me to navigate through life's messy waters. More importantly, they're not enough to get me to heaven. That's the most important thing. This is why the third element of my Trinity is my Catholic roots. My Catholic roots are relatively young. You see, my father, his father during World War II converted to Catholicism. Prior to that, he was a pagan. More interesting is the story about my mother. My mother was the first Catholic in her family. During World War II, she lost her mother from dysentery, so her father, my Lolo, raised her by himself. Shortly after the war, my mother's aunties she had some aunties that were already Christian. They were Protestant Anglicans, and they had her baptized as a child as an Anglican. Shortly thereafter, though, the Belgian sisters, the Catholic nuns there, visited. And interesting, my Lolo allowed them to visit frequently. I remember hearing stories from my mom about how they would visit, and she would take like a handkerchief and put it on her head, and she'd run around the house pretending she was a nun. Eventually, she learned the faith, became catechized, and became baptized. My Lolo allowed her to become baptized as a Catholic. She was the first Catholic in our family. It gets better than that, because shortly before his death, she convinced her father to convert to Catholicism. Yeah, she convinced him to convert from being a pagan shaman, pagan priest, to the Catholic faith. Thank you, Lord. Gotham Potsie. May he rest in peace. So that'll tell you just how young my Catholic roots are. Now, when we immigrated in America, that was about 1969, 1970. Just before we did that, in the Philippines, the Catholic faith was still practiced in the old rite. The masses were still said in Latin, and everything else was done in the old rite. Now, when we immigrated to America, the Catholic Church was changing right before their eyes. There were so many changes, because at that time, that's when Vatican II, the reforms of Vatican II were really taking effect. The biggest noticeable one was the new Mass. The traditional Catholic Mass was pushed aside, and a new liturgy was introduced. Now, I remember my father used to tell me how he would say, yeah, I remember when I was an altar boy, I used to have to memorize all the prayers in Latin. So, you know, I didn't know anything about the reforms or the changes as a kid. I thought, okay, so this is the Mass, the Mass that I see before my eyes, in the Mass I grew up in. The Mass of today, many of us call the Novus Ordo Mass. So I thought he was talking about that Mass, the same Mass, but said in a different language, in Latin. So I was like, oh, okay, so you had to speak Latin. I had no idea of how different it was. So that was a big change. Not only that, the churches were being bulldozed. They were being torn down, and modern churches were being built. They were the traditional way of having the churches face east were no longer adhered to. Beautiful statues were being taken down or replaced by these felt banners. There was a lot of changes happening in the church, and it was changing really fast right before their eyes. Even the nuns, I remember as a kid when I went to the Catholic grade school at Ascension in Oak Park, the sisters, the nuns, at one time they had veils on, and then I don't know when that happened, but I remember all of a sudden seeing sisters in short skirts. You know, I'm like, oh, you could see their varicose veins. I'm like, and our principal, our principal, she was, what's her name? Sister Constance. These were Ursuline nuns. Sister Constance, she had this really short cut hair, really short hair, short skirt, and it was, I was like, is she still a nun? Really, as a kid, I was asking myself, is she still a nun? She must be, because we still have to call her sister. Sister Constance. So all these changes were happening. So here's the thing. My parents are devout, very pious Catholic, and they try to be as devout Catholics as possible, as good Catholic as possible. They were always trying to go to Mass. They were daily communicants. From what I remember, they were daily communicants, especially with my mother. But they were very pious. They had no idea about, they did not have the advantage of a 2020 vision that we today have, and where we can look back and see how the church was, and then we look now and see how the church is, because this is what I'm talking about. The church now is in such bad condition. There's just so many things happening in the church. So many people have left the faith. Who's still practicing the Catholic faith? Very few. Just look at all the statistics. It can get very depressing about how many people no longer go to Mass, how many people no longer take advantage of the sacraments. There's just so many people are leaving the faith. The most recent research is really depressing about the real presence, and there was the latest research shows that baptized Catholics do not believe in the real presence of the Lord in the Eucharist. They do not believe that host at communion that we receive is the body, blood, soul, and divinity. Man, that's just mind-boggling. So you look at all the problems that's going on in the church today, and with a 2020 vision, you figure out what happened. When I was trying to connect with my Igorot roots, something better happened. One day, I drove my son to school at DePaul University, and it was a Saturday, and that Saturday I was compelled to go to Mass. I went to this one church. The church's name is St. John Cantius, and it was 8 o'clock Mass, and I went there, and it was a very beautiful church. It was very beautiful. A lot of gold. It was just so beautiful. I went in there, and I was really shocked. I thought I went into the wrong church. I didn't know where I was because the priest kept facing the tabernacle. And then he would murmur these things, and I was like, what is he speaking? And I thought, man, am I in like an Eastern Rite church, or is this a Ukrainian church? I didn't know. So at Mass, I pull out my phone, discreetly, and I Google it. And where am I? And it says, wow, this is the Trinity Latin Mass. This is the Latin Mass that my dad served. That was the first thing. I was like, so this is the Mass that he served. And then I was watching the altar boys, and this is what he was talking about. That was 5 years ago. And thank goodness, because since then I've been wanting more and more to connect to my Catholic roots. So three things that really stick out in my connecting to my Catholic roots. One was the liturgy, the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. I had no idea how different it was, how many prayers were removed from it, how diluted it became, how kind of almost Protestantized it became. I had no idea of all those changes. So that was the first big impact, because the Mass, there's a Catholic axiom called lex orandi, lex credendi. And basically the law of prayer is lex orandi, and lex credendi is the law of belief. It means basically how one prays affects how one believes. And that leads into a third aspect. The Latin would be lex vivendi, which is to live. So how one prays affects how one believes, which affects how one lives. So it all made sense to me. It makes sense to me because if you look, when I look at how I used to pray in the liturgy and how they affected my life, boy, it made sense. That was the first thing. The second thing that really jumped out in connecting with my roots is the spiritual warfare aspect of it. Of all the years that I grew up, and I went to Catholic grade school, I went to Catholic high school, my Catholic education, I can't recall where I was taught or where the priests at the pulpit would talk about the four last things. You know, death, judgment, heaven, hell, you know, those things, the most important things. And it's no wonder why there's so much evil and immorality going on, because people don't even believe in hell, or they don't believe in that anymore. We got bishops today, I won't say a name, but some prominent bishops in the Catholic Church who are even suggesting or espousing the idea that dare we have hope that everybody goes to heaven? No, not in the Bible itself. Hell is spoken, is mentioned in there more than anything else. I was fortunate to have met an exorcist, a great theologian and an exorcist named Father Ripperger. And when I first heard him, and I was hearing his conferences on YouTube, I eventually had the fortunate opportunity to attend his conferences in person. So I got to meet him, and I had asked him some questions and whatnot. But Father Ripperger makes a point. He says, you know, the devil is not under every rock, but he's in just about under every other rock. You know, you pick up one rock, he's there, you put it down, you pick it up again, he's not there. The point is, the devil is all around us, and there's a spiritual warfare going on, and we need to be, especially us men, need to be engaged in that, but we're not. The third thing is confession, and that kind of ties in with the spiritual battle, because when I went to Mass, the first time I went to Mass at St. John Cantius, I noticed these big lines at the sides of the churches. I mean, we're talking about 15, 20 people on one side, another 15, 20 people on another side, another 10 or 20 over towards the front, another handful of people. There were like 4 lines before Mass. I said, well, what are these lines? Are they, I mean, there's plenty of room. And I was thinking, there's plenty of room in the pews. You know, why aren't they sitting? Then I saw the little lights going on, and then the confessional was, wow, all those people were going to confession. That's one thing I love about the Latin Mass is confessions before Mass. At every Mass on Sunday. It's wonderful. So my Catholic roots is the most important. It brings the other elements of the Trinity, it brings them to the fullness of truth. And these future videos, what I'm going to be doing is taking this Trinity, this lens that I look at things, and come and look at all sorts of topics and issues and whatever else, and look at those things through the lens of this Trinity. So as I'm going and navigating through life's messy waters, looking through the prism of this Trinity that I just talked to you about, I'll always ask myself 3 things. Number 1, what changed? Why did it change? And is it helping me be a better person? And more importantly, is it helping my soul get to heaven? And you know what? As you'll find out in upcoming videos, every time I ask those questions, it always comes down to going back to the roots, my Catholic, my Indigenous roots, the American roots. It goes down going back to the tradition, to the roots. And as I go and I look through the lenses of this Trinity, I always bear in mind a Latin phrase that says, the Latin phrase of quid hoc ad eternitatem, meaning I'm always asking, how would this look in the eyes of eternity? You know, so let's look at things through the eyes of eternity from this point on, because we'll need it. And why we'll need it? Because we're battling a bad Trinity. Now let's go into that really quick. The bad Trinity is comprised of 3 things that I see. The first part of the bad Trinity that's always trying to tear apart what is good in this world. The first part, it's interesting, I'm talking about the Bad Trinity now, and I'm losing daylight because it's getting dark, right? But the Bad Trinity, the first part is paganism. And it's an ongoing problem. Not only just the paganism of worshiping other gods, but the paganism that we see today in America of making materialism and things like that, of worshiping these things. But even other gods, like for my Igorot heritage in the Philippines, back in the Cordillera Mountains, paganism is still rampant out there. It's still there, and what is sad is a lot of us have been converted to the Christian faith, but there's so much syncretism going on there, which is basically mixing our pagan practices and beliefs with the Catholic faith. You know, it's not just us Igorots. The Mexicans and Latin Americans, Hispanics have a big problem with that too. Just ask this guy named Jesse will tell you all about the problems that's going on there with syncretism. But there's that going on. So paganism is one thing that is a constant battle. The other thing is leftism, which is really kind of more of a political term, but it's talked a lot about by that guy I mentioned earlier and showed you his book, Dennis Prager. But leftism basically is the outright removal of anything God, okay? And then the third element of that Bad Trinity is a big doozy. This one is modernism. Modernism was said by Pope Pius X is the synthesis of all heresies. So you see anything that's happening in the church today, anything bad happening in the church today, whether it be the scandals, sexual scandals with the bishops and priests and whatnot, financial scandals, the poor statistics, all the people leaving the faith, so many things that you think, though all of that had its birth, had its roots, and they were all rooted in modernism. There's a great theologian, his name is Dr. Taylor Marshall, and I know it's getting dark, and I'll show you though, but he wrote this book. It's called Infiltration. Just came out this year. I recommend everybody get it. It's the plot to destroy the Catholic Church from within. And he talks about this, and when I read this, everything made sense. You know, people ask me, if you're out there asking yourself, how come my children aren't Catholic anymore, and I am, you know, or how come these people are accepting same-sex marriage and are Catholic? How come these people are voting for this politician, and this politician is advocating for abortion, but yet they're Catholic? If you think about all the problems in the church and you ask yourself, why? Well, it's because of modernism. It started up in the mid 1800s, and then it had its coming out party in Vatican II. So a lot of people talk about Vatican II being the problem of all the problems today, but it was happening long before Vatican II. Vatican II was just like the coming out party. So that's the Bad Trinity, and that's what we're battling, and there's so much to talk about this, but I hope you'll join me if we move forward through life's messy waters in the upcoming videos. So until then, please subscribe to this video, hit the bell to keep yourself updated. In the meantime, engage life's spiritual battles, make a Catholic difference. In other words, BenUp. God bless.